Hi, folks. Today I want to share with you some information about artist Jen Lewin. So, Jen Lewin received her degrees from the New York University Interactive Telecommunications program, which is a phenomenal master's program for interactive art. She has made permanent and temporary installations around the world. And it's interesting to me because she really got her start doing a couple projects for Burning Man out in the Black Rock Desert in Nevada back in the early 2000s. And these projects really propelled her career, and I'll talk about how later. She currently leads a small studio, and all the images I'm going to show you today are from her website. And I wanted to read you her brief bio as well. She's based in Brooklyn, New York, and over the past 27 years, Jen Lewin has honed her architectural background and highly technical mediums to fabricate large-scale interactive public sculptures that encourage community interaction and play. Uniting nature and technology, Lewin thinks beyond traditional media to create connected human experiences that bring vibrancy to public spaces. Existing at the intersection of art, technology, and community, her sculptures underscore the ripple effects that each individual has on their community and habitat, the energy of human connection, and the power of collective action. And one of the reasons that I like Jen Lewin's work is that she really takes advantage of physical computing in her interactive experiences. So one of the first pieces she did was called Harp back in 2005. It is a laser harp contraption. It's a little hard to see because it's at night, and this was from Burning Man out in the desert. Essentially, there are these three circular structures you can see here on the floor. They go up in space. There's a circle at the top too, and there's an array of laser beams going from the bottom to the top. There's 60 beams in the circle, and each beam responds to movement by changing an audio tempo and speed based on the sounds it plays. So if you take your hand or your arm or anything and interrupt these beams, it plays like a harp string. So this one uses lasers, and she continued with this idea to make sidewalk harp, which is not a circle. It's this kind of sinusoidal curve on the side of a building. It has 36 strings in quotations because there aren't actually strings. Each one of those, in this view, pinkish discs has an ultrasonic motion sensor and LEDs. They point down, so as you walk by this, you can run your hand under it. You interrupt the ultrasonic motion sensor beams, and it plays music and changes color in response. The whole thing is 40 feet long, and it's an interesting way to activate a public space and to bring some community engagement to an otherwise kind of empty sidewalk area. The ultrasonic sensors use a very high-pitched sound that we can't hear, and it emits that beam. It also has a microphone, so when that beam hits something and bounces back, it detects that, and that's how it knows that there is something moving or something there in the space. Kind of like the way bats use echolocation. And I wanted to show you a video of this. So,
All right, you get the idea. Now, so this was in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And one of the things that Jen Lewin has really excelled at as is taking an idea and really playing it out, like getting into it and seeing all the possible permutations um, and possible directions it could go in. So she has made several harps since that initial arc harp in 2005. She's made additional laser harps like Chandelier Harp from 2012. She's done harps for corporations and other public buildings like the Ballaston, Chandelier, um, Flow, Flux, different exploring different shapes, putting it in a spiral instead of in a line, freestanding versus wall mounted, all these things. So really exploring like the potential that this one idea has. In this one, you can see the ultrasonic sensors underneath there. Um, Another thing I appreciate about her work is including the picture people in the pictures when we're talking about interactive artworks and interactive media, it can be difficult sometimes from looking at just a picture of something to see how it interacts with, right? We usually need video. Um, but by putting people in, we can see like, oh, you walk by this, and if you put your hand underneath it, it does something. We might not know or be able to tell exactly what it does, but there's something showing us what exactly the kind of interaction is. Okay, the next piece I want to show you is Pool from 2008. This was also a Burning Man piece that she did. It consists of all these um, different kind of plastic rubber discs. They have some slight flexibility to them. And there's dozens of them, as you can see here. They're placed on the ground and they light up. The lights inside use these full spectrum RGB LEDs so they can be any color of the rainbow. One disc itself can have many different colors, as you can see. And when you step on them, they change color. Okay? Uh, and much like the harps, she's done tons of different iterations on the pool theme too. So she really refines and dives into a concept when she finds something that works. You can see Ascent. This was a more permanent installation. So these are very durable. They're surrounded with metal. I think they're a thick kind of glass or plexiglass or something instead of the squishy rubber that Pool was. Euclid, similarly, instead of working with circles, now she's working with diamonds and square shapes, again, in a permanent kind of way. Cosmos and Last Ocean are two other installations. Cosmos, she starts looking at like squiggle lines and circles, combining different shapes. And then Last Ocean has this kind of interesting uh, uh, pentagram shape that can fit together indefinitely. And Last Ocean has been installed in several places. It was at Burning Man and then in other locations around the world too. The nice thing with some of these, the temporary ones, like the first pool in Last Ocean, um, you can it's a modular unit, like one disc or one pentagram shape is a unit, and you can connect as many or as few of them as you want. So you can kind of scale the piece to fit a different environment for a different installation. So in doing like multiple iterations of a piece, she's really able to master the material and the concept, right? So she was able to refine that initial pull into the permanent installation to make it really durable. Um, Whereas these other ones can show in multiple locations. So let's look at a video of Last Ocean as well. And she's got a lot of photos. This is at a Burning Man. You can see there's a bear involved this time too. And it's neat too because there's like these separate little like kind of like iceberg float off areas. Here's the piece in a different location, right? So smaller scale, but the same pieces in two units. And you can see when people walk on these, they turn red and they have a little circular part, or in this setup, they turn rainbow effect when you walk on them, but in their default state, they're blue. Let's just see what else. Yeah, some more still photos of people engaging with this piece. So then she has a video on the making of um, Last Ocean, and I want to play that as well.
In all our searching, the only thing we found that makes the emptiness bearable is each other.
So I think it's nice to see from these videos too a little bit of that like inside or behind the scenes footage of the studio and the process. This is a unique piece for her because it's dealing with the idea of the ocean plastic and the impact that people have on the environment. And I think you can see that in the piece itself, right, where people walk on the ice, as it were, changes color, right? So if we imagine this formation as like an ice shelf, um, and where you walk on it, it turns rainbow, or in that one image we saw it turning red, there's like a clear connection between people and the artwork between people and the ice and the ocean health. To me, it seems more like it's perhaps referencing climate change in some sense, or like the human impact on the ice, which I think the piece represents more so than necessarily the ocean itself. But uh, that's the neat thing about art, is that we can interpret it in different ways. You can see more stuff about how she is using the different recycled plastics in making the shapes. And then the other neat thing about this too that I will mention briefly is this shape, that pentagram shape. It was not a regular pentagram, right? It was a kind of weird pentagram. Um, it's a very special kind of shape that can be tiled, right? And if we go back historically, um, the who is it? Marjorie Rice found many of these shapes, um, and there's a limited number of them. Right, there are only so many kind of shapes that can be tessellated in this way, and so she is using one of those kind of magic geometric shapes, as it were, that can be tessellated. And to me, the kind of geometricness of it really references this cracked ice phenomenon versus like the round discs in Pool, which have a much different feel. Okay, the last piece of hers I'm going to show you is Edison Orb. Um, and like I said, the last ocean is kind of dealing with specifically this ocean concept. Most of her work does not dive into like environmental activism in that kind of way. Most of it is about just creating kind of like a unique community space, something marvelous, something fun that brings people together to engage with a place. And I think the Edison orbs fit in that category. They are these chandeliers of many light bulbs. Um, Again, she really goes with a concept. So she's done many different versions of Edison orbs, resulting in Edison clouds, Braze clouds, Edison cow, etc. Um, and these, of course, they're not just chandeliers. They respond to people too. So let me show you how that works. They're really quite neat, and you can see here they have sensors, so they're detecting the presence of person in the space, and then they're adjusting each bulb's brightness to create a kind of shadow effect. So you see the shadow of the person on the light itself. So instead of like the light casting a shadow behind someone, like the light creates the shadow in front of them, which is also a kind of neat concept to think about. Also, somewhat like a mirror, it reflects you into the piece. Okay, so that's my take on Jen Lewin's work. The last thing I want to do quickly is to do a little critique of one of her pieces, just to give you an example of um, what a critique can look like. So there are many different kinds of critique formats. I'm going to evaluate the aesthetics of the last ocean piece that we looked at here using this 4-point analysis. So the first thing I'm going to do is describe the aesthetics of the artwork. What are the color schemes? So looking here, we saw it has primarily that blue-red um, color scheme, but it also in other versions we saw it when she stepped on it, there were a full rainbow of effects, so full spectrum color scheme as well, but with a predominant blue tinge. The compositional layout is mostly centered with small offshoot pieces, right? Little fragmentary pieces with a larger main section. The materials are recycled plastic, RGB LEDs, and some kind of pressure sensor to determine when each individual pentagram is stepped on. What are shapes or volumes are present in the work? It is I wouldn't say it's necessarily organic because it has these hard geometric edges, but it is a bit chaotic um, in its like outline profile. But at the same time, it is very regular in its shape because each of the tiles is the same five-sided shape. How does it use light and value and contrast? It literally uses light because it emits light. It uses light to create color. I will say, though, that the color and the saturation of the color is largely uniform, right? So, like, the colors are different, but the brightness seems to be the same throughout. There's not a lot of brightness variety except for the center of each pentagram shape is dark, and then there's a ring of light around it. The textures are, from this view, smooth. We'd really have to get up closer to it to get a sense of the texture. But again, I'll mention that as part of the texture, it has this kind of scale patterning to it. And the nature of the user interaction is that you walk on it, or step on it, or lay on it, or jump on it. You put your body on it somehow. It's not a fine dexterity thing. You're not using your fingers or hands to carefully manipulate something. Okay, so then analyze the aesthetics. Subject matter or content of the artwork is abstract, right? Looking at it, it's very abstract. Without knowing the background of the piece relating to the recycled plastics in the ocean, you might not grok that immediately just from looking at this. The flow rhythm of the artwork, uh, it has a very consistent rhythm, I would say, because of the tectonic nature of these parts, right? Each part is just like bloop, 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 bloop. They are all the same, so it's very like da 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 da. There's not a big dramatic shift, except for where we have these two breaks, right? So there might be, we could say, a break in the rhythm for these two smaller elements. What is the relationship between elements in the artwork? They are right up against each other, edge to edge, except for these two separate pieces. Is there unity or variety? Yes, to both. I would say unity in that the shapes are all the same. That gives it very strong unity, and uh, the colors are mostly unified too. The variety comes from when you step on it, the colors change, and the variety of the edge pattern, right? Like how the shapes are arranged give it variety. This edge is not the same as this edge. Is there a focal point? I would not say so. When you're interacting with the piece, the focal point is probably wherever you're stepping for you as a viewer participant. Looking at the thing as a whole, no one area draws my attention necessarily more than another. Um, Balance or imbalance, symmetry or lack thereof. Um, I would say it is mostly balanced. It is not symmetrical, right? If we draw, there's no line we could draw and flip this or spin it in such a way that it would be the exact same. But it does seem relatively well balanced. You know, each side has the same visual weight. We might say there's a little bit of an imbalance in these areas that are breaking away that makes these feel a little bit lighter, and there's perhaps some loss happening there. So describe, analyze the aesthetics. Why am I going into such detail about this? Before we can really interpret or evaluate something, we have to really see it, right? So we have to go really basics, and it helps to verbalize or vocalize or write down what exactly you're seeing, so that when you go to interpret and evaluate it, um, you know that you're basing those interpretations and evaluations on what you're actually seeing in the work and not some presumptions of your own. So now, interpret the aesthetics. How does it make you feel? I have not interacted with Last Ocean. I have interacted with Pool. It's really fun to jump on these things and see them respond to you. It's a neat experience. It's immediately responsive. Um, so in that regard, it made me feel some kind of joy looking at it. I think it's interesting and fun to see. What does it make you think about or remind you of? Seeing the trails, right, reminds me of maybe like um, ants or bugs or something like crawling around that has this kind of comet-like nature to it. Um, It reminds me, the pattern too reminds me of Voronoi patterns. It looks like kind of like a weird cell structure or honeycomb or something like that. So maybe I'm thinking about bugs because it reminds me of bees too. What is the expressive quality or mood of the work? Um, that's tricky. I think, especially when looking at the bluer versions of this, right? If we go back and look at some of, where's the blue version here? I mean, the overall blue color gives it a kind of like um, sad or somber or quiet feel, right? It makes it reflective, not in that it like a mirror reflective, but like introspective reflective. Um, there is in a blue state, there is a bit of a sadness to it. Um, and again, those pieces breaking away do give it a sense of loss. I think like in this iteration with the bear, too, there's much more of a sense of these pieces were once part of this and are drifting away, right? So why are they drifting away? And then evaluate what aspects of the design are successful. Is there room for improvement? How original is design? I think this is a very successful design. Um, the only other things I've seen like it are her other work, right? Um, so in that sense, it is perhaps not terribly original for her compared to her past work, but it is original in the field of interactive art. Um, it's successful in that like these things are very robust. One of the first things you learn about making interactive art pieces like this is that like they have to work well. You can't be like troubleshooting or debugging them once they're installed. So they and to deal with this quantity of people or this kind of environment, an incredibly harsh desert environment, they have to be extremely durable. So that's great as well. Um, in terms of room for improvement, I think the ocean connection, right? If she wants to make that really apparent and part of the piece, like looking at this, you'd have to read that on a descriptive label or somewhere else. Like I don't necessarily get ocean plastics vibe from just looking at this, right? A little bit more with the Burning Man installation. Where was that? Um, because of the bear, right? Like the bear, like okay, maybe that's a polar bear, and it looks a little bit more like an ice shelf. Um, so I'm starting to think about the the melting ice, but that doesn't necessarily make me think of ocean plastics either, right? So um, that element, if she wants that to be a strong conceptual piece of this work, I think could be pushed a little bit more. But there you go. That's how you do a describe, analyze, interpret, evaluate, critique of this work. I hope you enjoyed the work of Jen Lewin.